come this week to Parshat Shemot, the first Parsha of the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. We come to the birth of Moses, and we come to how Moses as a leader is born in the midst of the enslavement of the Israelites in Egypt. And we might ask, although we're so familiar with the story that we're expecting that Moses will be the leader, we are waiting for it, we can't even imagine the story any other way, we might ask, why Moses? What made him special? What gave him the right qualities out of all the different people who conceivably could have played this role? And when we think about who Moses is, we might find that Rabbi Joseph Hertz, the chief rabbi of the UK in the 30s, and the editor of the Hertz Chumash, the classic Chumash, the classic printed copy of the Torah in the Jewish world, pretty much from my grandparents' early adulthood to my childhood, I'll put it that way. He sums up what is perhaps the consensus or the first pass of the issue view. And he writes, Moses' warm heart for his brethren and his burning indignation against all injustice made him worthy of God's love and choice. God's choice is never groundless or arbitrary. And that certainly is true. We know Moses cares about justice. He's the one who's going to say, let my people go. Clearly he believes it. We know Moses is passionate. He's willing to go back to Pharaoh again and again. If anything, we actually see that he has a temper, and that's a character flaw of his throughout the story, even to his last days. After all, nobody in the Bible is some sort of a simplistic hero as opposed to a villain. Everybody's human, and that's part of what makes them meaningful figures, because we can relate to them. We can see in their good choices what to aspire to, and we can see in their mistakes, maybe some mistakes of our own that maybe we can learn to avoid from their example. But I think we see a little more to the story when, in the great eternal conversation of Jewish commentators, we go back from Rabbi Joseph Hertz in the 30s in the UK, and we go back and back and back and back and back to Sforno in late 1500s, early 1600s Renaissance Italy. Sforno always had a key eye for human detail and for the vividness of the human experience in the story. And he has a very illuminating comment in particular at the moment of the beginning of the burning bush story. And so here we are. This is Robert Alter's translation, Robert Alter of UC Berkeley, who really evokes the Hebrew beautifully in his English. And here's what we find here, that Moses is in the midst of herding his father-in-law's flock deep in the wilderness. And the Lord's messenger appeared to him, to Moses, in a flame of fire from the midst of the bush. And he saw, and look, the bush was burning with fire, and the bush was not consumed. Now that line we're expecting, right? The bush burning and not being consumed is also a very famous image. That phrase is even written over the entrance of JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, the conservative rabbinical school in New York. So far very famous. But here's one of the most underrated, easily skipped over if we're going too quick, verses in the Moses story. And Moses thought, let me, pray, turn aside that I may see this great sight, why the bush does not burn up. And the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see. And God called to him from the midst of the bush. And then from there the story goes on, as we're familiar with, and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am, hineni, the classic word of readiness and awareness. Here I am. And he said, come no closer. Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground. And this will set in motion God charging Moses with his new role as leader, and Moses initially doubting himself, but ultimately shows his humility, but ultimately accepting. Why would the Torah, which so famously is very terse and very compact, more like, say, Hemingway than, Charles Dickens, who was paid by the word and it shows, right? Why would the Torah take the extra moment to say that Moses actually thinks to himself, let me turn aside to see, and then God notices that Moses turned aside to see, and that's the hinge of this moment when Moses begins his career as a prophet and a leader? Why would the Torah take this moment to say so? Here's what Sforno says to interpret, turn aside and see. Let me turn aside and see, asura na ve'ereh, and Sforno interprets this to mean esbonen ve'ereh, let me understand it better, and I will see. In other words, let me turn aside and see doesn't just mean let me get a better view. Let me turn aside and see means I want to understand it better. I want to focus on it so that I can understand it better. Esbonen from the root bina, understanding. This is what Moses wants. He wants understanding of what's going on, because it isn't normal for bushes to burn and not be consumed. That doesn't make sense. And if something doesn't add up, Moses wants to understand it, because clearly it makes some sense of some sort since it's happening, but it's a sense he doesn't understand yet, so he wants to understand it better. That's what we're seeing in this moment as Sforno elucidates for us. Like all great interpretation, it's in the text. It isn't some add-on of some random nature, but we might not have noticed it until Sforno pulled it out and shined a light on it for us to see. And then, as the verse continues, and God saw that Moses had turned aside to see, and continuing in his theme, Sforno interprets this to mean God saw that Moses had been seeking to understand the matter better. Lehisbonen badavar. This is what God is observing, is that Moses has made the choice to want to understand it better. God marks that that's the kind of person that Moses is. That Moses is taking the moment to understand it better because it matters to Moses. When he sees something that doesn't quite add up, to take a moment to focus on it, to understand it better. And then, Vayikra elav Elohim, and God called to him. Sforno interprets this to mean God called to him lahodio, to literally to make it known to him, meaning to explain it to him more, to explain to Moses more what's going on in this moment. And so I think in addition to passionate, in addition to devoted to justice, we might also describe Moses as curious. Moses is someone who pays attention and who wants to understand better. Moses is someone who, when things don't add up, that matters to him, and he wants to know what's really going on. He wants to know what's not apparent on the surface. He is he's intellectually curious, he's perceptive, and he cares, which is a matter of the heart as much as it is a matter of the mind. And God has to wait for Moses to display this quality. Otherwise, even God would not be able to call out to Moses because Moses would not be listening. And if Moses were the kind of person who didn't really pay attention and wasn't that invested and was a bit apathetic or out to lunch or perhaps self-centered, then, or superficial, if Moses had just said, okay, there's a bush on fire, don't see that every day, but whatever, let's just get some Starbucks. I'm sure ancient Egypt had its equivalent of Starbucks, right? Moses would have just walked on by and he never would have been the leader that he was destined to be because he wouldn't have chosen that destiny. And one hopes God would have found somebody else. Moses is curious. And he's curious about what's going on with the bush. Initially, it doesn't have anything to do with slavery. As Robert Alter points out in the commentary that accompanies his translation, Robert Alter of UC Berkeley, Professor Emeritus, he writes, Moses is initially drawn by curiosity about the anomalous sight, scarcely imagining what he is getting into. Right? So the test isn't per se about slavery. The test is about curiosity. But if you have that trait, it's the right trait. It's going to serve you well. It's going to be needed for the journey. And indeed, we have seen Moses show this trait in other instances regarding the people's enslavement in Egypt, because after Moses grows up, we have this classic moment, and it happened at that time that Moses grew up and went out to his brothers and saw their burdens. That same word, see, in the sense that Sforno is helping us understand better, see meaning focus on in order to understand, right? We see in this moment the same curiosity about why is my people enslaved? The same curiosity as in, why is the bush burning up? And this is the moment when it says, and he saw an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man of his brothers, and he struck down the Egyptian and buried him in the sand. It's that same sense of curiosity that is married to Moses' passion and Moses' dedication to justice. Without curiosity, the whole thing would fall apart. If you're going to work for justice, first you have to notice what's going on. You have to pay attention. You have to care. It has to matter to you to understand what's going on. You have to understand what is, and you have to understand what ought to be. And then that's the foundation for the project, which is moving what is to what ought, moving the way our world is to the way our world ought to be. So perhaps in the moment of the burning bush, God is testing Moses one more time. I have to make sure that his curiosity is crystallized, here to stay, and not just a passing fancy. And if that's the case, then this is the right person for the job. And Moses passes the test. The American journalist and op-ed columnist David Brooks once wrote, when you see a stadium, perhaps appropriate for the night of the Peach Bowl, when you see a stadium of everybody doing the wave, and you see one person in the crowd who's not doing the wave, that's a journalist. That's what it is to be a journalist, David Brooks is saying, to observe, to want to look at what's going on and focus on it and understand it better, and not just to go along with the motions of everybody else, but to want to understand the motions of everybody else. I might suggest that what the Torah is saying is that when you see someone who's not doing the wave, that's a prophet. And perhaps in David Brooks's evoking journalism, we can say that perhaps there can be a little bit of a dash of prophecy in each of us that we can each carry into the work we do professionally and in other ways, if we can hone ourselves to be curious and pay attention and understand better and then act on what we see the way that Moses did. Shabbat Shalom.